Tycoon Tether. My powerful boss number 7. How many kisses does it take? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I dreamed of Jackson Stone tying me up, making me count each kiss as his lips brushed my skin. Then he turned me over, his hand firm, and made me count again as he spanked me. How much will it take? Dream Jackson whispered the question, his voice low, teasing. Dream Delilah, somehow braver and far more composed than the real me, had the perfect answer. Everything. I woke up in Jackson Stone's bed, stretching lazily like a cat basking in the sun. My hand instinctively reached out to the other side of the bed, but it was empty. Damn that man. Sitting up, I scanned the room for the telltale golden envelope. Nothing. My lips curled into a smile anyway. The soreness from yesterday lingered faintly, a reminder of his hand. My fingers brushed over my skin, tracing the memory, and I felt a little thrill run through me. For a moment I lay there perfectly content. No rush, no pressure. But eventually, I slipped out of bed, wrapped the silk robe folded neatly at the foot of the bed around me, and wandered over to the window. As I looked out at the lush garden, my thoughts turned to Jackson. The things he'd told me yesterday still swirled in my mind. His business partner had seduced his girlfriend years ago, breaking a part of him that had never fully healed. And yet they'd remain partners. Was that the beginning of the icy wall he'd built around himself? Or had it simply been the final straw? And what did that make me? Some broke, naive girl who could magically bring him back to life? Was I supposed to be his escape from this world of power and wealth, pulling him into a simple life of mud brick houses and vine-covered gardens? I shook my head, laughing softly at myself. 1 10-minute conversation, and suddenly I thought I understood him. It's funny how we do that, cling to a single thread of someone's story, and weave an entire tapestry from it. Jackson Stone wasn't a solved puzzle. He was a maze, complicated and layered, and I barely knew where I stood inside it. My gaze fell to the garden below, where a red mud brick house stood among vibrant flowers. Blue blossoms dripped from vines that tangled around it, a picture of beauty and solitude. He had built that house to forget her, or maybe to hold on to her memory. Either way, it was a piece of his past that he'd revealed. And how had I responded? By bringing up contracts with his name on them. I sighed, frustrated at my own idiocy. Next time, I vowed, I'd just kiss him, or undress him, or make him a damn sandwich. Anything would be better than what I'd actually done. I ran my fingers over my skin again, feeling the faint soreness from his hand. It hadn't all gone badly, I supposed. After a quick shower, I wrapped myself in a thick white robe and made my way downstairs. It was a work day, sure, and I was well past the point of being late, but I had a feeling we weren't heading into the office today. I found Jackson in the east wing of the mansion, sitting at a large table. Contracts were spread out in front of him, his fingers tapping rhythmically on his laptop. As I entered, he looked up, his expression softening into a smile. But beneath that smile, I saw it worried tension, the weight of whatever was on his mind. He rose and walked over to me, pressing a kiss to my lips before pulling me into a brief hug. Nadine will make you breakfast, he said, his voice warm but distracted. And there are clothes in the guest room upstairs. Mio helped pick them out. With that, he returned to his laptop, his focus snapping back to the work in front of him, as if the conversation were over. I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms. Excuse me? You bought me at that auction, remember? That means you own me, at least for now. And it's question time. His lips twitched in amusement as he looked up. Yes. Where did you get the contract with Mr. Black's signature on it? The one I showed you before I spanked your ass? He raised his eyebrow at me. Yes, sir. That one. The one you showed me before you fucked me. I raised an eyebrow in return. It was at my mother's house. We stored business documents there years ago. Then my father died, and it was a big mess in the transition. The place has so many storage rooms it just became one of those problems that you let go. I had almost forgotten they were there. So that's why we went to the bachelor auction. No, he said, his eyes coolly appraising me. We went to the bachelor auction, so I could introduce you to my mother. The contract was 2 birds, 1 stone. I filed that away in my mind somewhere between holy moly and OMG. He really had wanted me to meet his mother. And what are you going to do with it? Call the police? He shook his head and looked out across the mess of paper. It's not enough. Black is. He's always been a risk taker, and playing on the edge of the law is his specialty. But there's one thing he's better at than that. He sets up companies that own other companies. Layers within layers. And so if anything goes wrong, he can shut it down and move on. It works, and he transfers money between the businesses. We used to do it a lot. Split, merge, reverse merger, stock buyouts, licensing processes to other businesses. But then about 2 months ago, I noticed some of our competitors have similar technology to ours. Or more exactly, ours was like theirs. And I start to look into it and discover all these little companies working together. Money flowing around them like an ocean, never landing anywhere, debt appearing and disappearing. Black has been in charge of chemical and pharmaceutical research for a long time, and I run the rest. But I think he's been draining debt out of the business, covering it up, and sometime soon it's all going to come toppling down on us. He sat back in his chair and let out a frustrated sigh. And I think it will be big enough to destroy Stone Black entirely, unless I can find some way to prove it and stop it. But I have to find it first. Finally some answers, but I needed more. Black was here and you were talking with him. What was that about? Eavesdropping? Tisk. I pulled out a chair opposite from Mr. Stone, sat down and picked up a contract, as though I was going to read it. I have extraordinary hearing, I said, talking mainly to the sheets of paper in my hand. I found some anomalies in some of our solar power research. We hired certain people with particular skills and patents, but then it looked like they soaked up money without producing much at all. I found some of those shells within shell companies. He came here to convince me to double our funding, or we'd lose billions. I told him I'd think about it, and he told me we didn't want another Stone Pharma on our hands. I put down the contract. Mr. Stone was watching me closely. What did he mean? When it burned down, we didn't get much from the insurance company, because most of the research hadn't been commercialized in any sense. At the time, it was a massive blow to us. Nearly took us under. Later on, we managed to make millions from it, but it was a close call. He seems to think that if we don't double down on the solar research, then we'll lose it all. In my work, I'd seen the emails and correspondence about Stone Pharma that he was talking about, but I'd only see what had come later when they had already made millions, and it looked like one manager shut another one down saying it was only a few million and not worth pursuing. I guess I hadn't found where they had nearly lost everything thanks to a fire. You must have seen the look on my face. I didn't burn Stone Pharma to the ground, but I still felt some guilt about it all. A man had died. They, whoever they were, had used my photo to get my family to stop protesting, and it had all fallen apart after that. Even when I was 16, I felt unsure about holding the Molotov, but I'd been peer pressured into it, and then I'd screamed like a fool, and they'd taken my photo. It had been a setup and it had worked. It wasn't your fault, Mr. Stone said. That business had been my father's, and he had made himself very wealthy from stomping over that line between legal and illegal. If I had known what they were doing in Bedford, I would have burned the place to the ground myself. Maybe I would have run into a young rebellious protester. Sparks fly, passions run high, Montague and Capulet and all that, he added. I laughed, and then looked across at all the papers and boxes on the table. Mr. Stone picked up a thick pile of contracts and pushed them across to me. It's somewhere in here. Or it's not. We just need to find the right thread to pull, and it will come undone. Black is a genius at all this, but he's also sloppy. I'll help you. Mr. Stone smiled at me. I know. And you can save your bachelor auction day for another time. I can't wait to. Washington. Your dishes. He said it with a look on his face that nearly made me leap across the table to fuck his brains out. I managed to restrain myself. We had work to do. I left him there with the contracts and bolted off to the kitchen, where Nadine was preparing another multicolored omelet. I apologized to her for rushing through such a delicious breakfast, and wolfed it down in about 2 minutes flat before going upstairs. In the guest bedroom, I found the closet filled to the brim with clothes all in my size, ranging from casual around-the-house stuff to an amazing little black dress, so dark it looked like it was sewn from the fabric of the night itself. I did also find a tweed suit, an orange PVC skin-tight dress, and something that I think was pretty much a big woolen tube, that I had no idea what you did with it. I smiled as I folded it up and put it back on the shelf. Mio had helped pick out the clothes. I dressed in a pair of black stretch jeans and a white t-shirt with Astro Boy on the front of it, before slipping on a pair of black shoes with a thick sole like a hiking boot. Giving myself a final once-over in the mirror, I then headed downstairs to help Mr. Stone. Asterisk. When I got back, Mr. Stone was 2 rooms away talking in low tones on his phone. He was pacing like a tiger in a cage. I closed the door between us, so I wouldn't accidentally hear his conversation. If he wanted to tell me, he would. I picked up one of the contracts and looked at the legalese gibberish before putting it down again. It would take a team of forensic accountants a month to figure this out, and we were meant to do it by ourselves? Mr. Stone must have his reasons, though. I guess Mr. Black had access to the computer system, and who knows who he'd been working with from the finance department. Thinking about Mr. Black reminded me of him drunk at the bachelor auction bidding on Mr. Stone. What had he yelled out? 191 million? It seemed such a specific figure. Mr. Stone came back and placed his phone on the table. Chief Financial Officer's assistant has confirmed some unusual transactions. Anything in the 191 million area? I reminded him what Mr. Black had yelled out at the bachelor auction. He shook his head. And the truth is that we do business in so many ways that these could just be normal transactions. We sat down and began to go through the files page by page. Sometime we compared what we saw, but most of the day we worked in silence. I had a pad next to me writing down business names and dates, and Mr. Stone kept going out into the other room to make phone calls before returning to work. Lunch came and went. Nadine delivered a platter of sandwiches that were nothing short of incredible. As the day wore on, it became clear that Mr. Stone wasn't finding what he needed to. I could feel the stress radiating off him like heat. He'd smile at me if I smiled at him, but this problem was big and all-consuming. In the middle of the afternoon, I went outside into the rear garden to stretch my legs. The day was sunny and warm with a picture-perfect blue sky, and we were locked inside with boxes of contracts. I walked down the garden and stopped in front of the red mud brick house. The last time I'd seen it up close, it had blue flowers dripping off the vine wrapped around it. Now half the flowers were on the ground, slowing decomposing. I imagined Mr. Stone, 20 years old with a shaved head, standing in the garden building this. Had he been furious? Or just sad? I continued on down the path until I reached the hedge maze. I walked in, the temperature immediately dropping a few degrees, and took a few turns until I arrived at the first satyr and nymph statue. The forest nymph was still on her back, her face a mask of pleasure, and the satyr was still fucking her. I touched the cool white marble and remembered the last time I'd been here. Mr. Stone had me wearing a crazy vibrating sex toy that was somehow tied to where I went in the maze. I'd nearly collapsed at this statue when the vibrations had ceased to give me a rest. I let go of the statue and touched the leather collar around my neck. I'd been wearing it so long that I often forgot I had it on, until I saw myself in a mirror, or Mr. Stone held me by it. It was a reminder that I was his. I turned around and left the maze, walking quickly back to the mansion. I was his and he was mine. I would do everything I could to help him. Asterisk. Mr. Stone was finishing up a conversation when I returned. He came back in and tried to smile, but it didn't go any further than his mouth. I walked over to him and wrapped my arms around his body. "It will be okay," I said, although I didn't have the slightest proof that it would be. "I know," he replied and then frowned, looking into a file box behind me. He reached into it and pulled out a piece of paper. "What's this?" He had the diagram I'd drawn yesterday, trying to figure out which company owned what other company, and who was licensing to who. It must have gotten mixed up with the box of contracts. "It's nothing. Trying to see who owned who. It's all wrong." I held out my hand for it, but he waved me away, absorbed. He sat down in his chair to study it, so I went to my side of the desk and sat down. Suddenly, Mr. Stone leapt up and I gasped in fright. "You're a genius. I'll be back soon," he said and kissed me before practically bolting out of the room. Thanks." For the next half hour I kept going through various contracts, putting sticky notes on pages, and getting that feeling of being a duck on a pond, paddling furiously beneath the water, but not really getting anywhere. My eyes started to glaze over, and my mind drifted off to more enjoyable things, like Mr. Stone and his wonderful cock. Where was he anyway? Could I sneak up on him, crawl under his desk and suck his cock? Oh, to do that in his office. I nearly moaned at the thought. Maybe it was because that was where he first spanked me, bent over his desk. I wanted to be in that room, kneeling in front of him. This was all serious, deadly serious. But that meant we needed something to relieve the stress. He could spank me. He could fuck me. I stood up, ready to go find him. I want you. Now, Mr. Stone said, clasping my neck from behind. Damn him being so quiet. I moaned and pressed myself back against him. I felt wanton and crazed, and my fantasy was overriding my mind. I want to go to your office. I want you there. His breathing was heavy, like he'd been jogging. I felt his fingers tense on my collar, and he brought his face down close to my throat and breathed in my scent. You have been obedient. I will give you what you want, he whispered, and then stepped away from me and let out a breath. Meet me outside in 15 minutes. I have something to do first. He rushed out to the other room, and I headed for the other door before we could grab each other again. Another moment more, and we'd be fucking on the table. Upstairs I had a shower in all of 1 minute, and then found a silky blue dress that fit me like a glove. I wore no bra or underwear. The dress was too tight for that. I stepped into a pair of matching blue heels and silently complimented Mio on her taste. I rushed downstairs as fast as my heels would allow and found her waiting outside with the Bentley. She nodded in appreciation and then opened the car door for me. For the first time ever I heard Mr. Stone behind me, his shoes echoing on the polished wood floor. He hustled me into the car, and then we were off. We didn't speak the entire way, but his fingers traced patterns over my palm, and then stroked up my arm, and then down to my thigh. I took a lot of deep breaths and concentrated on the view outside the window, telling myself that I had permission to get hot and bothered once we were at the office. Asterisk. We arrived and Mr. Stone took a black case from the trunk before escorting me inside. It was still a work day, albeit late in the afternoon, but Mr. Stone didn't seem to care about the looks we were getting. As I walked beside him wearing his collar, I realized that I didn't either. Let them look. We went to the standard elevators and up to the office. My resolve to not get too hot and bothered started to weaken as we ascended. The elevator seemed to magnify his scent, and no matter where I looked, I could still see him watching me. We reached the top floor, and I followed him through to his office. The black mahogany doors closed behind us, and then locked with a soft click. It was only a faint sound, but it sent my mind into overdrive. The last time the door had been locked, Mr. Stone had me fuck myself with a vibrator while sitting in his chair. You know, we didn't get a chance to start your training, Mr. Stone said. He unclipped the case, each lock echoing through the room. I snorted and then quickly covered my mouth at the look he gave me. No, we didn't start training, but then again, I told you I would earn your trust. He opened the case to reveal a length of thin rope. Kimbaku means tight binding, or sometimes people call it kimbakabai, the beauty of tight binding. As he spoke, he unspooled the rope and tested it in his hands. With every movement, I found my desire growing. He gave me the rope and I ran it through my hands. It was soft, but I could feel it was strong. Do you remember your safety word? Mr. Stone asked, arching an eyebrow. Yes, sir, I answered. Red crept up my face. Molotov. Do you trust me? He asked, sliding the rope out of my hands. He had asked me this question before, but my answer before had been, well, not a lie. I did trust him and he could trust me. I just had secrets before. Absolutely, sir. I'm going to tie one arm behind you and connect it to the ceiling beam. The rope will wrap around your body. Then I'm going to use a toy, but you will be the one in control of it. I'll be in control? The devilish look on his face was making me wet just standing there. Please start. I dragged out the pause as long as I dared. Sir. Undress. I want you naked. There wasn't much to the dress I was wearing, and I had no underwear on anyway, so it only took me a moment to slip out of it and step down from my heels. As the blue folds of the dress slid down my body, Mr. Stone watched. As soon as I was naked, I slipped my middle finger into my mouth to wet it, and then traced it down my body. I cupped my pussy and slipped my finger inside. I saw Mr. Stone swallow, and when he moved, his hard cock pushed against the front of his pants. "Hands by your sides," he said, his breath halting. I slipped my finger out but couldn't help moaning as I did. I kept my gaze on Mr. Stone. He stepped closer to me and then grabbed me by the wrist. He lifted my hand to his face and sucked on my wet middle finger. I swear I almost came right then as his tongue rasped over my skin. He then pulled my finger out of his mouth and pushed my hand down forcefully to my side. I got the message, no more disobedience. He turned back to the case and lifted out 2 black eggs connected by a thin piece of plastic. I felt my temperature rising as soon as I saw them. He also held a bottle of lubricant. Aren't you prepared, sir?" I said. I don't know why I was feeling so cheeky. I just wanted to defy him for some reason. To push. Mr. Stone stepped behind me, and I felt him dab cold gel on my ass. I sighed as it instantly warmed, and I felt pleasure coursing through me. The memory of him fucking my ass came rushing back, and I didn't even realize I'd tilted my hips until he gave me a soft smack on the rump. "Breathe, slave," he whispered in my ear. I felt a soft roundness touch my entrance, and then he slowly pushed the egg inside me. A moment later, he pushed the other one inside my pussy, and I held both in place. Working quickly, he looped the rope around my waist, across my breasts and down between my legs. It was tight but not uncomfortable. As he looped it between my legs, I felt the thin rope press against my clit. There was no way those eggs were coming out now with the rope in place. As soon as he had this done, he pulled my right arm behind me and slowed down. First he looped around my wrist, and then I felt him knotting the rope further up my arm. Each loop became a knot that held in place, but then connected to the rope beneath it. As he worked, I felt the rope under and around my breasts touching my skin. It was like my breasts were swelling by themselves, and each movement made them larger. Soon Mr. Stone was looping rope around my torso again and down to my right leg. The patterns were intricate, each knot a work of art. I stood there feeling myself becoming more aroused as he focused on binding me. As he moved around me, I had to hold back from simply dropping to my knees and opening my mouth. I wanted to grab him with my free hand, pull his cock into my mouth. Finally, Mr. Stone stepped away from me. "Look," he said, pointing to a mirror on the side. He moved out of the way, and I saw myself for the first time. Between each knot I saw a pale shape of skin. Squares of flesh and triangles too. The knots were on top of knots, around them and under. The rope spiraled around me in an intricate pattern that was both beautiful and erotic at the same time. Mr. Stone moved behind me, and I saw a piece of thick rope lower from the ceiling. I looked up, but it seemed to be issuing directly from the ceiling itself. How many gadgets did this madman have, I thought to myself with a grin. I watched in the mirror as he tied the thicker rope around my bonds, and then pulled on it. As he did, the ropes vibrated, and I felt the pressure across my pussy increase. Satisfied that I was bound in place, Mr. Stone went to the case and took out an envelope no bigger than the head of a teaspoon. He opened it and tipped the contents out into his palm. He held it in front of me so I could examine it. It looked like a heart rate monitor, like the type they put on you in the hospital. It was a tiny papery circle with a silver dot of circuitry. "Measuring my heart rate, sir?" I asked. Mr. Stone laughed and told me to hold out my left hand, palm up, at shoulder height. I put my arm out, and he pressed the dot into the palm of my hand. It's a very sensitive altimeter developed by our very own business. Pairs up to computers, electronic devices, and can measure even the tiniest of movements. As he spoke, he continued to hold my arm out, supporting it. "And now I have work to do. Stay still until I tell you otherwise." He let go of my wrist and walked around behind his desk. I knew what was going to happen, but I tried to fight it anyway as Mr. Stone started to shuffle through paperwork, giving the appearance of a man simply getting work done. I felt the muscles in my arm began to tire, and thought about the abandoned weights I had sitting in a dusty corner of my lounge. I had been working with them months ago. I felt my muscles start to ache, and then I dropped my arm slightly. Barely anything really, but the effect was immediate and sudden. I felt both eggs inside me start to buzz. Unlike the crazy underwear Mr. Stone had me wear at the party, these were not silent. They hummed loudly, and as I twitched and my arm lowered, the pitch went up. I took a breath and pulled my arm back into position. The buzzing died away, and I was left panting in a sweat. "You bastard," I said and dragged the gap out again. "Sir." Mr. Stone took out his phone and tapped a few times on the screen. "What I really like about the sensor is that you can pair to multiple devices all at once," he said, his eyes gazing into mine. What did he mean by that? It was already connected to the eggs inside me. My arm started to hurt again, and I trembled, trying to hold it up but feeling like the sensor now weighed a ton. I had the sudden bright idea to lift it above my head to rest my muscles, but as soon as I moved it upwards, the buzzing started anew, and this time, the rope behind me moved upwards. I felt the ropes tighten against me and pull upwards. I felt like I was tied up in some vibrating web. The ropes between my legs pressed against my clit, and as the eggs vibrated, the buzzing spread across the ropes. I felt it in my breasts, down my arm, around my leg. I said to stay. Mr. Stone admonished me. I lowered my arm, but I could only hold it a moment. Soon it started dropping towards the floor, and the buzzing ramped up again. "Please, sir," I begged, trying to lift my arm up but failing miserably. The rope connected to the roof was inching upwards with agonizing slowness, and soon I'd be up on tiptoe. I felt my eyelids drooping as the sensations vibrated through me. Every inch of skin touched by rope was buzzing, and as I lifted my arm and dropped it again, a wave washed through me. "Yes, Delilah?" Mr. Stone said. He was sitting with his phone in front of him, and his fingers steepled, looking like some evil genius. "Please, you?" "I want you, sir," I managed to say. I flung my arm up, and as my hand passed shoulder height, the buzzing vanished. But it was a mere flash of respite, because as soon as I went too high it started again, and when I couldn't hold it up, the eggs buzzed even harder. "Perhaps you want to come?" "Do you?" His voice was low and mocking, and as soon as he said come I felt myself tensing. My body was falling into a rhythm, as the vibrations inside took me higher, and the rope outside quite literally took me higher. I moved up onto the balls of my feet, and tried again to hold my arm out. "Yes, sir, please, I want to come," I cried, feeling my shoulder muscles burning in pain at the effort. My arm dropped down, almost to my side, and the eggs vibrated with such power that I thought they'd shake me apart. Mr. Stone walked around his desk and clasped the back of my neck, pulling my face close to his. As he held me, the rope behind lifted me off the ground. I felt pressure across my pussy, and as I lifted off the ground, I tilted forward. I was suspended entirely off the ground, held in place by Mr. Stone's rope. Mr. Stone clasped his other hand behind my neck and pulled me towards him. All I could see were his intense eyes. "Come for me," he commanded. I let my arm drop, and the two eggs kicked into a higher gear with a jolt that shocked through me. I screamed, my face just inches from Mr. Stone, and squeezed my eyes closed as my orgasm burst across me. It felt like fire and ice touched every point of me at once. My legs shook, and with my free hand I gripped the rope wrapped around my thigh. It seemed to last forever, and each wave of pleasure made my eyes heavy, and mind wiped clear again and again. I felt my feet touch the ground, and then the vibration fade away as the rope in the ceiling lowered me. "Kneel, slave," Mr. Stone said as the rope relaxed. I didn't have much choice. My legs couldn't hold my weight, and I felt like I was drunk. I was mindless, but somewhere in there I wanted him still. I wanted to feel him close to me. I needed him. I knelt in front of him, my eyes heavy, and watched as he pulled his thick cock out. The tip was wet with pre-cum. I moaned when I saw it, and tried to pull forward, but I was still held in place by the rope. Mr. Stone smirked down at me, and then pushed his hips forward, so the tip of his cock was just in reach of my mouth. I licked at it, trying to move forward to take more of it in. Mr. Stone moved his hips forward, and slid more of his cock into my mouth. I sucked it in, pulling my head back and forth as far as I could. I heard him sigh as I sped up, and then he began to move further forward and back, fucking my mouth. His breathing got faster, and as he moved he jolted me. The rope pressing against my pussy began to rub against my clit, and I found myself moving my hips in time with his thrusts. His rhythm sped up, and as the rope moved I came. A moment later he did too, and I was swallowing as he filled my mouth. My pussy twitched, and with each movement I sucked on his cock. eager for every drop he had. Finally, he pulled away from me, and I rested back on my knees, completely spent. He stepped behind me, still breathing heavily, and began to untie the knots. It took hardly any time at all for his expert fingers to free me. As the rope untwined from my body, I felt lines like warm fire across and around me. In a moment he had me free entirely, and I toppled sideways onto the thick carpet. Mr. Stone stroked down my back, and then lay behind me, pressing his body against mine. He moved closer, and I turned over, nestling into his chest as he wrapped his arm around me. I had no words for what I had just experienced. I had no words, full stop. I was going to speak, but instead I let sleepiness wash over me. Asterisk. I awoke on the carpet, and for the first time ever, Mr. Stone was still beside me. There was no golden envelope or Mio to take me somewhere. He was beside me with his eyes closed and his breathing smooth and even. "Are you asleep?" I whispered. I felt his hand move behind me, and then he tapped me on the rear. A playful slap. "Are you asleep, sir?" I asked again and then bit him on the chest. He laughed and rolled over, pinning me beneath him. "Those eggs are still inside you," he warned with a raised eyebrow. I quickly shut my mouth. He stood up, and then helped me off the ground. My legs were still shaky, and I honestly felt like I was stoned. My eyes were heavy and my mind was clear. I felt like I was in that space between asleep and awake. He took me to the shower, and under the hot water, I eased the eggs out of my body, feeling a ripple of pleasure again. In the mirror I saw my body was crisscrossed with rope marks that stood out in glowing red against my skin. I felt like I'd been branded. Mr. Stone took the eggs, gave them a quick rinse, and dropped them to the floor of the shower. We soaped each up, not talking, just content with the nearness of the other. I ran my fingers down his well-defined chest. "When do you find time to go to the gym?" I asked, tweaking his pec between my fingers. "There's one in the house. 45 minutes of high-intensity weights at least 4 days a week. And I lead a very active lifestyle. I've never seen a gym there. It's a big house. All kinds of secret doors." He had that look in his eye again, and despite being worn out, tired and well fucked, I felt myself responding. I kissed him, my hands finding his strong back, and he kissed me back. Before it could go any further, a loud ringing began in his office. Mr. Stone broke away from our kiss, a look of concern on his face. He quickly shut off the shower, and grabbing a towel to wrap around himself, ran out into his office. I followed, trying to dry myself while dripping water everywhere. Mr. Stone grabbed the phone that sat on his desk. "Yes, what is it?" he demanded. He listened, and then I saw a look of pure anger come across his face. His muscles tensed as he gripped the phone. He looked like he was about to smash it into a million pieces. "Where?" Finding myself too tense and anxious to do nothing, I picked up the rope from the floor and coiled it up. "Is it bad?" I saw him raise his hand to his face and cover his eyes. His fury had turned to sadness and worry. "Yes," he said finally and hung up the phone. "What is it?" I wanted to go to him, but he was still clenching the phone in its cradle, his fury bubbling beneath the surface. "Some men broke into the mansion, took the files. No one was hurt." My heart sank, and I felt the cold prickle of adrenaline. I had been so insistent that we come to the office. I'd practically forced him to bring me here. I saw the thought cross his mind at the same time it occurred to me. What would it look like for someone to destroy a business? Falsified contracts. Originals missing. Proof of crimes committed vanished into thin air. An assistant who seduced the boss. I had collected all the contracts the blackmailers wanted. I had taken them out of the office and delivered them to Mr. Stone. And now they were gone. He looked up at me, as though he was seeing me for the first time, and I could read it in his face. Maybe I really was here to destroy Stoneblack after all.